Welcome back to the Producer Podcast. I'm your host, Micah Versman, and today I'm joined by Tim Mahoney, the director and producer on several documentary films, including Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus, and The Red Sea Miracle. Join us as we sit down to discuss his journey in film and producing documentary films. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Well, it's great to be on the show, Micah.
So to start, maybe just take a few minutes to share kind of your journey in film and how you got started.
Originally I was very interested in music, and I still am interested. I started out playing an unusual instrument called a pedal steel guitar, and that got me into a lot of different bands when I was growing up. I was playing, like when I was 15 years old, I ended up leaving home and traveling with a group for a summer. And I did it twice. I went with these different groups. And it was an opportunity for me to get out of my home state and travel to Nashville and to different locations like that, Washington, D.C., and go on concert tours. And after I traveled with a band for a while, I started to see the other side of music, which was, staying up all night trying to keep the bus driver awake, and carrying equipment in and dressing in locker rooms. And, once you get on the other side of the curtain and you see how much work it is to be a musician, I started to reevaluate my desire to be a career guitar player.
Okay.
And even though I love music and I've been in lots of groups, and I'm currently in a group right now that I'm having a lot of fun with, I could see that I ended up seeing a movie when I was 18 years old that really impacted my life. And it was based on a true story of a woman by the name of Corrie ten Boom. And the film was called The Hiding Place. And her family during World War II hid Jewish people in their home. And eventually they were betrayed and they all got arrested and sent off to concentration camps. And Corrie ten Boom was the only survivor. So I saw that movie when I was 18, and I actually saw it 3 times in a 1 week. And it had really been the first time I'd ever been to a movie theater, because I was from a conservative Christian home and we didn't go to movies. But because that one was about, let's say a Christian family that was helping to save Jews, it became acceptable for me to be able to go do that. And so that's how I ended up becoming aware of cinema.
Okay.
And then after I got out of, I went to 2 years of college, and I was going to go into radio. And I loved radio and used to hang out at a radio station. One of my friends was a manager there. And just to listen to and see all of the inner workings of a studio, that was fascinating to me. But so I didn't know what to do. And I heard this announcement on a radio station about a film school. And I thought, I never even thought about that. Well, maybe I should check that out. And so after 2 years of general college and graduating, I ended up going to a small film school. And it was like the most wonderful experience of my life, just like a whole new world opened up. And I think the thing that was really interesting was I didn't really know how to photograph. I had never really looked through a camera and tried to set up a shot. And so all that was a learning experience, and editing, writing. We had a lot of experimental filmmakers, everyone just like me that didn't know anything,
Yes.
A lot of people go to film school with lots of different ideas and different degrees of talent, and I ended up, never finishing that film school.
Okay.
Because I met my wife, and I knew that I wanted to be married. I had grown up in a single parent home, and we were poor. We were on welfare because my mother had 4 kids and my dad left. And so I had to, when I was 18 years old, I was required by law that I start to support the family as well to offset the welfare. And so I had already been working for several years, turning my paycheck over and working 6 days a week. And I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to go and just start my own family.
Mm-hmm.
And that was of interest to me. And so when I met my wife, and I just felt that she was the right person, her name's Jill. Um, we got married 3 years after I graduated from high school. So I was it would have been in my fourth year of college that I got married, and never returned back to college. And ended up painting cars, of all things. But that was our family business.
Okay.
An uncle did that, but that was a really good move because back in that day, he trained me well, and I became a professional car painter in my 20s. I made enough money to actually buy a home in a really nice neighborhood. And I was making probably double what a lot of people were making back in that day. Even guys who just graduated from Notre Dame. I know I was making twice as much as
Wow.
they were making because it was based on how many cars you could paint in a week. And it was based on commission.
Mm-hmm.
And that allowed me to build actually a recording studio. The reason I wanted to buy a house was because I wanted to build a recording studio and see if I could get a media company started. And I met a guy who worked at a local TV station, an engineer, and he took some of his money and I took some of my money, and I offered the location, and we built a full studio, multi-track recording studio. We had a baby grand piano and a drum booth, and you know, we had all the stuff that you needed. And that sort of whet my appetite to then actually, the thought came to me about making a film. And I ended up making a film based upon one of my relatives had an archery company, which is very well known. If you know anything about archery, it's a company called Matthews Archery.
Okay.
Uh, and he also developed a lot of things like the Genesis bow for kids, and started the whole archery program worldwide. And so we made a film. We went up to Canada and we made a film about him and his archery company and his brother. And it was an hour long. And I included music in it. I hired musicians from PB or from Nash, or what was it called? Prairie Home Companion out of Minnesota here. We have Garrison Keeler. And so I got some of the musicians from there. I wrote all the songs. And so it satisfied my musical interest along with my film interests. And I made this hour-long documentary. By the time I got done with it, I was so tired and exhausted and spent all my savings and borrowed money from relatives that I didn't know what to do with it. And I was just exhausted and spent completely, financially and sort of emotionally. But it did offer me an opportunity to show it to an ad agency. And
Okay.
I showed the film to an ad agency, and I ended up, they only watched like the opening credits. Then I turned it off. I was like, wait a minute, this is a whole hour, don't you want to watch my whole thing? And he had seen enough, basically, to be impressed enough. And then I came back with an idea, and I said, hey, I told him a story about the fact that there's a man who had an orchard, and he had too many apples to pick. And so I said, I told the whole story about someone came along, and I said, well, I want to come and help you pick apples. And then after I did that, I had a bushel of apples there, and I showed it to him and put it on the table. And then behind those apples, I also had in this box an apple pie. I said, I'd like to work for you. And then I took the pie out. And I said, I just want to know what's my piece of the pie. And he loved it. And I ended up getting hired. And, but it was risky because I was leaving a really good job to
Mm-hmm.
work for a lot less money. And I had 4 kids by this time. I was 30 years old, just turned 30. And I ended up being able to sell. And I was able to sell ideas, just like I came up with the idea of the apple and the pie and everything. I started going out and just talking with people and selling ideas. And I ended up selling the biggest account that he had ever had.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and he had never had such a big account. And I ended up selling a number of big accounts. And he said, I don't just get it. He says, everybody seems to believe what you're saying. I said, well, why wouldn't they? I'm telling them the truth. I'm not making anything up. He says, yeah, but it's just so believable. And I said, that's because it's true. you know, I mean, but I think he was right about something. I had a credibility to what I was saying, and I believed in what I was saying. And I wasn't just trying to sell somebody something. And I kind of realized that there's a way I would look at marketing and start to try to figure out what's the problem here that needs to be solved. And then I would come back with a proposal, and I'd say, hey, what if we did this? And an example of that was there was a transmission company that had a franchise, and so they had to figure out what they're going to do. And I had a meeting with the owners of the franchise group, and they said, people actually try to tell us, they try to make the sound of what the transmission is doing over the phone. And I go, that'd make a very funny commercial. And so I came up with a campaign called Funny Noises. And it was people on their phone making all these, or, all these crazy sounds in different settings. And it, the tagline was, we can't diagnose your car over the phone, but we can give you a free estimate if you come in,
Yeah.
And I gave them a tagline, quality repair from the people who care. And they loved it. And their sales literally tripled.
Wow.
So that's when I started realizing that from a creative standpoint, as a filmmaker, you're trying to figure out what's the right story to tell, and how do I tell this story? And then there's things like, so I had the opportunity to, it was a good training for me to understand how to tell short stories. I had only 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And usually I had about 24 seconds because 6 seconds had to be devoted to the branding of the name or the offer or whatever. And so I started making, probably eventually over the years, several hundred commercials where I would create them, I'd write them, I'd create campaigns, and I had the gift to just go, hey, I have an idea. What if we did this, or what if we did that? And just the thought would come into me, and then I would articulate it, and it was a stepping stone then for me to become a filmmaker. And the discipline of making short stories with commercials was a good training. And so for a number of years, I made these commercials, knowing that eventually I wanted to be a filmmaker.
Okay. So then from those commercials, how did you get into the more like documentary investigative genres of filmmaking?
There was I was always conscious of the fact that I didn't want to get stuck just making commercials. I mean, it was exciting to make commercials because then you go, hey, I'm going to have a commercial on tonight on the news. And then,
Yeah.
it was like, oh, there's my commercial. But the challenge I always had with commercials, and the reason I bring this up is there's nothing wrong with making commercials, but they weren't satisfying enough for me
Okay.
from a professional standpoint to say, I think I have something more to do or something more to say. And there was a project that came along. There was a book, a best-selling book that was one of my relatives saw at an airport, and he picked it up and he read it. And it was called The Bible Code. And it was about the fact that people were looking at the original text of the Bible and they were putting it into a software, and they were looking for which was called a skip sequence, where they were going
Okay.
so many letters, and they would look for another letter. It's like they were finding words within skip sequences, and they were basically suggesting that these different words were that were coming out were telling us something, or there was messages encoded in skip sequences. And so we ended up I ended up helping him develop a project with some other filmmakers who had done quite a bit of television with CBS. And we made a special called Secrets of the Bible Code. And that was my first big documentary, of which I was just a co-producer. I wasn't the main person. I directed the host sequences at a PBS studio. And it was just learning. I had so many things to learn. And I think for filmmakers, one of the ongoing truism is that things keep changing,
Yes.
and you've got to, technology will continue to change. Sometimes the distribution channels, the marketing will always be sort of changing, but story pretty much stays the same, but there's different maybe genres of story and different ways to tell story that are maybe a more consistent. But the issue is you have to be willing to keep learning, whatever that might be. And in my particular case, I think in many, many cases, the people I see that succeed in becoming filmmakers are the ones that just decide, I'm never going to quit. From now on, I'm going to be working towards being a filmmaker. And I think the beauty of today is that now with, let's say, Final Cut Pro or the other types of softwares that are out there, they're so affordable. Yeah, there used to be a big barrier because you used to have to spend to have an edit suite. Like when I first got started, was a real edit suite was about $300,000 of investment to just to get started. So it kept a lot of people from being able to do things. And they used to have offline and online editing, where offline was just sort of a rough cut. And the sophistication now that we have is just startling. And now they've got cameras. We used to shoot on film, and it would be like $20 just for 2.5 minutes to buy the film, and then another $20 to process it, and then that wasn't to have even, I don't know if you got a work print from that, but there were, so for 2.5 minutes. So everyone was really cautious about what they shot and how they shot it, and they didn't shoot a whole lot. And then video came along, and people just shot lots of stuff. It was still pretty expensive, but now today you can get such high quality, as we all know. I'm not telling anybody anything new, but surprisingly, there's still very few people that just like make films, even though the equipment is cheap. I'm saying there are people, but for the most part, we oftentimes have a barrier in our mind about making something, and we always think, well, if I could just get to this position in my life or whatever. And my encouragement, that's why I like documentary film, because I know that I'm one of you mentioned before the show that not many people that you've talked with make documentary films. The thing I like about a documentary is that you don't have to have a huge cast. You don't have to, you could start making a film on lots of subject matter
Right.
because it's documentary.
So then I guess my next question for you would be, how do you decide if an idea is worth going through all the work of producing into, say, a documentary?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that you have to find out, like, the idea has to be worth it for you, I guess. Some people make documentaries because they have a passion for a particular subject. Let's say it might be butterflies or like, well, I don't necessarily care about butterflies, but I care about other things. And so whatever you're really into, but there's an audience there. And the question will be is, are you making films for commercial reasons? For example, that you want to basically sell the film and make money at it and make um, a business out of it. And what's interesting is there's a man who I found out that made, this is before YouTube, he made a video about how to change a bandsaw blade.
Okay.
Now, he made a lot of money because there was just a vacuum on bandsaw blade, So in a sense, it was a documentary, and it was a documentary that you wouldn't have thought that there'd be that many people interested in getting a video on how to change a bandsaw blade. There was another. There have been different videos that have been made or films that have been made about sort of topics that you wouldn't think would be so interesting, but there's actually a market there for it. I do know people who are making what I'd call esoteric films.
Okay.
And they're making them for themselves. And in my particular case, I want to make films that people would be interested in and that I'm interested in. So it's sort of not just like a commercial where you're hired to do something because that's the thing that you need to, what am I trying to say? You're hired to make a commercial about a tire or about a fishing pole or about, a car dealership or something. Those are good exercises to just stay in the industry. But it's not the same as being a filmmaker. And so I decided to make more films that are more commercially interesting. But yet I was still passionate about them because you don't know sometimes when you're working on a project if anyone else is going to be interested in it. So that's why it's very important too that you make the film so that it has the quality that you're not apologizing for it as you go along.
Okay.
Because you're going to have to live with that film for the rest of your life, if it's out there. And if you've got scenes that you don't like, you should just get rid of them. It won't have as long a lifespan either if it's not done where it can be appreciated by others. And now today we have more people that are commenting on films or whatever. And so
Yes.
how many stars does it get? We've got, I have one film called Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus. It's a 5-star rated film. I think it has over 2,000 5-star, it's like, I think that's the number. And so it's a highly rated film and it did really well in film festivals and we won a number of awards, but that film took 12 years to make.
Oh, wow.
It was a long process. And I made 2 films prior to that film. So it wasn't an easy journey to make that film. And it was emotionally draining. But now that it's been done and I can sit back and look at it, and I can appreciate the whole film. And it feels like a well-made, well-told story. So it was worth pouring my life into it. And now it's been rewarding for a number of years. It's done, I don't know, millions of dollars worth of business. So it's been a very profitable film to have made.
What does kind of, I guess you could say, maybe that pre-production process for a documentary look like? I guess like I'm kind of thinking when you're figuring out maybe who you should interview and trying to get those types of things scheduled and set up and ready to go.
Yeah. What happens with documentaries is that you oftentimes might only have an idea that there's a story here. And so you're trying to figure out, well, who do I go talk with about that? And we used to do documentary script writing from what people wrote in their books. And we'd say, okay, we need this person. They're going to say this and this and this. But then when we actually went to film those people, sometimes they had changed their position a little bit and they didn't say exactly what they said 5 years ago. We found that it's more productive to go out and get the interviews and work from that. We then take the interview, we'll prepare with a series of questions, and I don't have just surface questions.
Okay.
You have to do some research on the people. And when I've done more research on people, I've gotten much better interviews because they truly realize that I'm not asking them surface type questions. And you're
Hmm.
trying to get a little bit deeper in the subject matter. And um, you know, I can talk with people if depending on how much time they'll give me, but they sometimes wear out. But I have had some interviews that go for 5 hours,
Oh, wow.
5 or 6 hours in a day. Um, and we'll take a break and then we'll come back because I've traveled, let's say, quite a distance to get the interview, and they'll give me the day, and
Hmm.
I'll say, well, let's talk for the day, and we'll take a break. But if you've got older people, they get tired after. I mean, you can see they start to. They're not the same
Yeah.
as they are when after lunch. So you always have to watch out because everyone eats a little bit of lunch, they're fine, and all of a sudden they're just getting a little quieter and they're talking like this and they're about ready to fall asleep, and you realize, wow, their energy level is not the same. But I find that interviews are also, the location of an interview is very important. Yeah, so you know getting a lot of interviews. I try to always make sure that people are not right up against the wall,
Hmm.
because there's no background. Move them to the far side of the room where you've got the room that speaks to who they are. If it's their study, then don't put them right up against their desk in the study. Take a chair and pull it much further away and light the background, or let it have that emotion of what their study looks like. But a lot of people, I go with some wide angle lenses because I'm in the interview, so I can get
Okay.
both. I can get both of us in there. And some of the locations, you asked about pre scouting. I think that's very,
Hmm.
very important, um, to get to locations ahead of time, or ask the person you're going to interview, could you send me some pictures of locations? Uh, Pre-pro is very important for documentary filmmaking. I know there's about a bit of it that's done on the cuff, but there's legal issues that you have when you're going to locations that, like, do you have rights to film in this room? Do you have permission to film in this room? How can you get that written permission? Because when you get done with a film, you're going to have to get it cleared. You're going to have an insurance policy that
Yeah.
gives you errors and omission insurance. And well, what's an error? An error is the fact that you're in a location or filming some piece of art in the background that you don't have permission to. You might not realize that when you're in certain, let's say, places or museums or libraries, somebody might have donated a piece of artwork and it looks beautiful, and it might be, let's say, the Revolutionary War, and you're doing this interview, but that family has not given you permission to film their picture. And I've
Hmm.
actually had situations where last year we had a beautiful painting that was given by the family to a person, and we put it in the shot, but the attorney said, don't use that picture, you're going to have to do something. So I had to sort of slide the camera and digital away from
Okay.
that image, because he felt it was potential risk of a heirs or omission of the ownership of that. And so there's legal things you have to consider when you're going to going into a foreign country. For example, you have to have preparation. Is you have to have what's called a carnet, and
Okay.
that and a carnet, if you're going to film in Egypt or in other parts, if you leave the country with camera gear, you have to have all the serial numbers and all the information identified on a form. And we hire an insurance company that basically ensures the fact that we're leaving this country with these cameras, and we're going to, when you come back into the country, you're going to have to show them that form and that you came back. Because what they're worried about is if you purchased equipment in another nation for a lot less money and then come back with that equipment, or if you
Hmm.
sell your equipment. So you have to have it inspected. So before we leave, you go to customs and you have a carnet, and it's a name for what you're going to be taking out of the country. And when I go to Egypt or Jordan, I have to have a fixer, and that fixer basically helps me go through customs and shows them all the equipment. And they might say, show me this piece of equipment. And I have to go find it and show them that and the serial number. Show me this piece of equipment, and I have to go find it. That's when it gets really sticky. Sometimes they just go on through. Other times they say, no, you're going to have to show them. I've had some times where it's taken a long time to get through customs. So those are certain things that you need to know when you're going into a country. You need to have the difference is there's legal and there's customs and there's insurance. I once had a man break his arm filming in Israel. He fell off on his own accord, fell off a little, probably 10-foot thing. It was like a little cliff when we were in the desert. He slid down and he broke his wrist on a rock. I had to pay for that, and so, but you could, so making films eventually is like any other kind of activity where you're creating a product. There'll be product liability that you need to clear. There'll be copyright ownership. There's all the things that you have if you want to be the creator of a film. You're not much different than if you're a creator of any other kinds of products. You just have to know what are the legal ramifications for me to do these things. And you have to know then, if you're going to go film somewhere, do I have rights to film at this location?
Yes.
For example, Arizona. If you film in a particular area of Arizona, they've got this particular kind of cactus.
Okay.
You have to have rights to film that cactus. If they see that cactus has been filmed and you didn't get the rights from, I think it's either Arizona or New Mexico. I think it's Arizona. They'll come after you if they see it.
That is crazy. So I did want to jump back to a question when you're talking kind of about locations for interviews, and that, have you noticed when interviewing people, does the location you choose change the quality of the interview? I guess I'm thinking like if they're in like their study as opposed to maybe someplace they're not overly familiar with, but maybe you chose because it's going to look really good on camera.
Yeah, what you're talking about is I've had how comfortable are people, and sometimes people don't realize locations are very important because of lighting and because of space for the cameras. And it depends on if you're only filming the person or if you're filming two people, because then you're going to need a lot more room. The other thing is I always like to film with 2 to 3 cameras. Pretty much now I just film with 3 cameras, but 2 cameras, and then 4K you can push in on 4K to get more shots. We always finish in HD. We're not planning on finishing in 4K at this time because we just don't have the storage and everything for all the stuff that we film. We film literally thousands of hours of content. So we don't have the storage capability for all that. But we do have it. We do film it in 4K, and everything's been filmed in 4K, but we do not finish in 4K at this time for the stuff that we're selling. But so the issue then is, if I look at a location, I want to make sure it's part of the story. In other words, if that person lives in a particular place, I could fly people here, but I'm scratching my head to say, well, where would I put them? I'd much rather have the storyline be, I went to Atlanta, or I went to Budapest, or I went to Germany. So there are times when I'll fly to 5 countries to get these different interviews, and then I film myself in the airport. I film myself traveling. I hold my iPhone out the window and gets clouds and wings of airplanes and things like that. And so the location is really important. And do people feel more comfortable in their home location? They would. But sometimes they're okay, depending on how professional they are, if they feel like you've really done something to make the location look great and they don't normally get to be there. Let's say if you're going to film in the British Museum and you said, hey, I'd like to film you at the British Museum. Can we do that interview? And they're like, oh yeah, let's do it. And but then you have to pay. Or you have to pay for the British Museum. And I've rented the British Museum. I've rented Oxford
Okay.
Museum. I think it's called is it Bodiam? Very famous museum there. I've rented in a lot of different museums in Israel and Egypt, the Egyptian Museum. It's fun to rent a museum because you got the museum there, and you can, you get there before hours, and you film. And you just have to be really prepared. So documentary is about a lot of pre-production. And I would recommend, if you could travel, if you could go to the location ahead of time and scout it, even if it's the day before, then you know where the electrical outlets are, where the sun is coming from, what the sounds are like. There could be a sound of a furnace, or the sounds of maybe people are working on a street outside, and you have
Yeah.
this whole thing planned, and you don't know about that. All of a sudden you go, this is busted. How are we going to do sound here? Right now we have the light rail coming in here, and they're constantly pounding pipes, and you don't know sometimes the rest of the world, but you're trying to get a feel for the sound. Oftentimes is the most critical and the most challenging. You might be out in the English countryside, 30 miles from an airport, but you can still hear the jets overhead, so you need to stand out in those different locations and get a feel for that.
Then another question I had is, what things have you learned when it's come to budgeting for documentary processes?
I think documentaries one thing is that I've learned is I like to own all my own equipment. There are people that rent equipment all the time. The problem I've had with that is that I wear lots of hats, and to try to get a different camera at different times and try to learn it, that's when you're under pressure. I find that pressure is too much to go, oh, how do I get this?
Yes.
They have menus in cameras, and if somebody who rented it before has one little thing deep embedded in a particular area, and you get back and go, what just happened? What's going on? And you realize that, let's just say, what I found is you get your own equipment and you set it and have it set and have help set so that it's exactly the way you want it. And then you don't let anyone else touch it. Then you don't have somebody who changed the shutter, or you've got problems with, you've got everything from, these aren't as difficult, but, just what is the shutter set at? What is, is it 24? Is it 30? Is it interlaced? Is it, all those things that you might run into trouble with later on. I just find I always like to have it done exactly the way that we want it and keep everything there, because I take 3 or 4 cameras, film cameras with me, different kinds, and oftentimes they all have to be set the same way, or else there's a little different look to them. And I have them set up, so that they all feel like they're similar. I find that weight is an issue. So I have a small hand scale, and I try to weigh all, like when I go to Egypt or when I've gone to different parts of the world, I got to make sure I'm under 50 pounds, because I don't put any of my cameras underneath the plane. Everything, I try to have 2 or 3, myself and my wife goes, I've taught her how to do sound, and we're a small crew, and I love it. There are times when I'll pick up a cameraman in Germany or Israel or Jordan or Egypt, and they'll help me. But then again, I've got sometimes their equipment that doesn't look exactly like my equipment, and they like their equipment, and they don't necessarily understand my equipment. And I had one cameraman in Jordan just change some settings, and we have no idea what he put those settings at. We could never figure it out. And it always had this odd look to it, so we're trying to solve that problem. And if anyone's going to mess with your stuff, then identify it before they go into those settings, that you understand what they've done. And but I think that lighter is better, obviously. And there's, I'm shifting to, I used to carry 300 pounds, 330 pounds of equipment with me, with just myself and my wife. And then we pick up a
Okay.
crew. So, we had, three tripods and huge, big lenses and, the whole thing. And now we're trying to become a lot lighter. I would be carrying just on the plane alone, probably 120 pounds of camera gear. And then I would put the other stuff underneath the plane. So I think pre-production, like I said, if you can get there, you should go look at everything beforehand or have someone scout it and send you pictures. Even when I do all that, even when I send all the costumes and everything and have a producer in country, it still doesn't make it at all guaranteed that it's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's just a picture of a valley that's pretty hard to screw up. But looking at costumes sometimes, until you get to see them, until you see the people. And
Yes.
like I've rented tribes in the desert to play characters. And I've sent out all the examples of the costumes. But when I get there, it's not quite the same. And the people don't look quite right because we just didn't do all the pre-production that we needed to do. We had a bigger idea than maybe we had a budget for.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you're dealing with smoke and mirrors to try to make everything look good.
Okay. You mentioned sometimes you work with a producer more local to where you're going. So kind of what's that relationship like? What are they normally overseeing and making
You
sure
have
happens?
to, well, if you go to Israel, if you go to any other country, I suggest that you get an in-country producer and you try to go to some platform where they could suggest and get references and find out, are these people trustworthy? Because you're going to need someone to work with the locals, speak the language. And so now I have an Israeli producer, a Jordanian producer, an Egyptian producer, even in Saudi or other countries or Germany, England, I've hired different people that are in country that basically know the language. They know what's necessary. They know what's no, and they protect you. They pick you up at the airport. They get you through customs. You have to basically work with people like that. I would never ever try to do it without them, because you would be in big trouble. I know.
Okay. So I have just a couple more kind of wrap up questions
Mm-hmm.
here. So first one would be, what would be one piece of advice you'd maybe want to highlight to a filmmaker that's just getting started producing documentaries?
Well, I think that documentary filmmaking is really a wonderful kind of filmmaking because there aren't as many constraints on you as far as the kinds of films that you can make. And you can do lots of work with just you as the filmmaker. And I think even I'm trying to think of his name, George Lucas. I think when he
Yeah.
first started as a filmmaker, he really enjoyed more. I think he said when it was just him and a camera. When you start adding layers and layers of complexity with different people and everything, you start to lose sort of touch with the making of a film because there's just so many different. It's different. It's like the difference between being a craftsman with a hammer and a saw and building something, a cabin, versus somebody who's now building a skyscraper. And a lot of filmmakers are building skyscrapers, are building, great big films, and they kind of lose that. It becomes it becomes a big corporate structure. So being a documentary filmmaker allows you to actually be in touch with the people where the story is. It allows you to be the screenwriter. It allows you to be the director, the cameraman. It allows you to pick up, have a sense of direction and change the course when the story opens up more, and you see an opportunity to tell a different part of the story you didn't know existed. And I've made entire films based on new information that came out. And those are really significant, important films. So it allows you to do things like that you couldn't do necessarily if you're making a feature film, because once you lock a feature film in, um, generally it's very expensive to start rewriting that film
Yeah.
after you've got it going. Whereas documentary, uh, it can take different. It's not as expensive for you to explore where the story is taking you, and I love that about documentary film. Um, I think that, and my advice is that um, try, if you don't know how to film, then try to find the right kinds of relationships that you can either you need to learn how to film, or you need to find the right person and find like a band that would, you find the drummer and you find the bass
Hmm.
player and you find the guitar player, and before you know it, you're making music. Well, it could
Right.
be the same thing true, is that there are other people that want to make films, but they don't necessarily want to direct, but they want to do sound, and they want to do lighting, and they just love that aspect. If you can find a small team of people that can become your filmmaking partners, then I would suggest that that would be another way to fill in those gaps that you're unaware of, and then learn. I've learned all the different roles, and I'm really a director, a creative, but I also can film, and I can do sound, and I can do lighting. I've learned how to do all those uh, out of necessity, and I watch other people get on other crews and see how people light, see how people direct, and try to get as much experience as you can, and know that it's a lifelong uh, endeavor. You can make films for years to come. My plan, I'm older now, and I've been at it since I was 19 years old, wanting to be a filmmaker. And so I have like 45 years of pursuit of this, and I don't plan to ever stop. I mean,
Nice.
I'm going to keep making films for the rest of my life. Um, I'll share something with you too. If anyone wants to know, they can see some of the trailers and actually buy our films. We have a site called Patterns of Evidence. Patterns
Okay.
of Evidence, patternsofevidence.com is where our films are. And I've created a whole genre in this world of investigative filmmaking, looking at the archaeology and the history of the Bible. So that's one of my, we have actually, I sell direct to consumers. I created our own studio, in a way.
Hmm.
And I have my own facility now with editors and studio to film. And I started distributing other films. And so now in the fall, we've got a film coming out called Times of Fire, The Seven Churches of Revelation.
Okay.
And that's coming out of France, which is a 9-part series on the book of Revelation. A lot of people are interested in the future and what does it hold. And this
Yes.
French filmmaker, Christophe Hanover, he saw my film on Netflix, the first one, the Exodus one, and he was inspired by that and ended up getting a crew together and went to Turkey and did his own. It almost feels like the Da Vinci Code kind of style. And he went and filmed there and was able to make an amazing 9-part series. And they got it onto like France's HBO. And then when he came to me, I said, well, why don't we make this into a feature film, a series of feature films? And so we're going to be in theaters and on e-streaming worldwide on October 11th and 12th. If you go to
Okay.
thinkingmanfilms.com, thinkingmanfilms.com, you can see the trailer for Seven Churches Times of Fire.
Nice. I'll definitely be going and checking that out. Um, so then my final question for you is, what advice do you have to filmmakers about how to balance time devoted to film as well as time devoted to your family?
Well, make films about your family and then you do both.
Very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. I think that everything in life is like that, is trying to find the balance between well, it could even be if you're single, just how do I have a healthy life and not just do one thing or the other, one thing to the exclusion of the other, or
Mm-hmm.
or exercise. And I think it takes a discipline, and that was a problem in my own life because I built a recording studio in my home. And so I would work all day, and then I would go downstairs, and I had a band that I was recording, and then I work on Saturdays. And my wife had these, we had 4 kids when by the time we were 30, and she was a nervous wreck because she also had to keep the kids quiet because we were down in the basement. So how do you keep these kids quiet and I'm never around? And she actually got depressed for a while. And finally, one of my friends said, "Hey, your wife is not happy." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Yeah, I can tell you, your wife's not happy." And I couldn't see any of that. I was just focused on, building my career.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was still working in the body shop in the day, doing the recording studio. Then I started making a film, and everything was all about all the things that I had to do. And so I had to readjust, and my wife has been very patient over the years with me. And so I've tried to reward this by her being a part of it. And she's slowly become more and more involved with the business, and she travels with me. So we've traveled to Europe a lot, to the Middle East, and I've taught her how to do sound, and she helps me with a lot of the work that I'm doing. So I've incorporated her in. I'm thankful that she was willing to do that. And so that's one way. But I do think you have to be careful because none of my kids are interested in being involved with film. They all have different interests. None of them wanted to be a musician. Everything that I was so interested in, they're not interested in. And so I don't really have a business to pass on to anybody
Mm-hmm.
because they're interested in other things. And it could be that I didn't give them the best example of what a healthy life was like. I was so focused on the career. And I can say that I have been fortunate and I've been successful, but you have to be careful about success, that you don't do it at the price of your own family. And I think maybe that's where the question comes from. Um, it takes a lot of effort. Like I'm getting up at 6 in the morning to get to the office at 7, so I can edit for 5 hours, and then I go to other meetings, and then I can come back to editing because I'm trying to get another film done. But I'm also distributing a second film, and I'm also raising money and developing a variety of things, and so there's many hats that you have to wear. So uh, I think that you just have to be patient too, and don't give up. I think my advice to a lot of filmmakers is, if you really want to be a filmmaker, then you just need to take one step after another. And this might take years. I'm at a place now, but it's taken me many, many years to get to this place where I can actually have films in theaters and sell films direct. But had I not stuck with it, I wouldn't be here today.
All right. That's some great advice to end on. So thank you very much for coming on the show and talking with us today.
You're welcome, Micah. Good luck to you.
And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast. Until next time, make sure to subscribe to the Producer Podcast, and thanks for listening.